Now the second practice we will do is reading values and saving them in two-dimensional array. So let's assume that just like the previous slide, we have declared a table that is of 2 rows and 3 columns. So this is our table and we have 2 rows and columns. We are having a scanner because we need to do reading of values from the user. And we would like to format our output as follow. We will ask the user for values by saying enter values for row 0. If the input was, for example, 10, 20, and 30, it means for row 0, I should have 10, 20, and 30. And then I will go and ask the user again, please enter values for row 1. So if this is row 1 and the user says 40, 70, and 60, it means these are the values we have to save in the columns of row 1. Now, because we need to do reading of values of two-dimensional array, which means we have rows and columns. So just like what we did in the previous slide, it means we need a for loop for I, which means for rows, another for loop for columns. And that's why we have this is a for loop, the first one, and this is the second loop for the column. So if we just go through it, it says here for integer I equals 0, just like we agreed, I less than table.length, which means I less than number of rows, which is 2, I plus plus. Now the first thing, once you start your I loop, which is for each row, we need to output a message saying system.out.print enter the values for which row. So that's why this statement will be repeated only at the beginning of the row. So when we have I equals 0, once we started, it will output a message saying enter values for row, and because I is 0, we will have the value here as 0. And then it will say for j equals 0 up to the end of j, go and read the values and save them in I and j. So when just like we have the value of I 0, j will be moving 0, 1, and 2. So whatever values we have, it will be saved in the columns. So the first time when we have 0 and 0, we will read the value 10 and it will be saved in location 0 and 0. The second time when we have 0 and 1, we will read the value 20 and it will be saved in the second location. And then when you have 0 and 2, the reading of 30 will be done and it will be saved in location 2. So we are dealing for first row and we are reading the numbers. And then once you are done with your j, it means you are done with your first loop. It means we will go back and start the second one. So I now will be moving and I will have the value 1. And the first statement we will have to do is output this message, enter values for row I, which means enter values for row 1. And then you will have a j loop, and j will go from 0 till the end of the columns with the current I, and the current I is moving from 0 to 1. So it means I will still be 1, but j will be moving. It will move 0, 1, and 2, and the values will be reading 40 will be in location 1 and 0, 70 in location 1 and 1, 60 in location 1 and 2. And by this, you will be done with the reading of the two-dimensional array. So as a practice, reading the values of two-dimensional array, usually this is the second step that is done after declaring the elements of your two-dimensional array. And the idea is just like we discussed in the previous slide, always you should have two loops, one for row and one for column. So remember, the first loop is for each row, and the second loop will be for each column. Now, I need to display a message at the beginning of each row. That's why we have the system.out at the beginning of the I. And then we have the loop, and inside the j loop, we are doing the reading. If you need to display a message for each item, so instead of having enter values for row 0, we say enter values and then we read 10, enter values and we read 20, enter values and we read 30. So for each element, simply you have to move this system inside the J. So it will be repeated 6 times according to the numbers you have. But if you need it only for each row, so just keep it at the beginning of the row number. Similarly, just like you are doing reading of values, you have to know how to do output of values in two-dimensional array. And we can do output in two ways. We can do the output by each row, or we can do the output by each column. So let's assume that we have our array already declared and we are done with the reading of the values. So my table consists of the following values for each row and each column. Now my next step is I have to do an output as follows. I will have to go and say values in row 0 are 10, 20, and 30. Values in row 1 are 40, 70, and 60. So it's more like we are doing this. We are saying go to row 0 and then output the values, so 10, 20, and 30. Once you are done, you have to move to the second row and you have to output the values 40, 70, and 60. Now, the concept is still the same. We have to have number of rows and number of columns. So I should have two loops. So I'm having the first one for each row and the second one for each column. Now, once we start I, so this is I equals 0, I would like to have this message, which is values in row 0. And that's why we have here system.out.println values in row I. So it will say values in row 0. And then I have to move with J and we have to do the output. So moving with the J, with the columns, this is why we need the second for loop from J equals 0 up to table I.length J plus plus. So J will start from 0 and it will move till the end of the columns. And all the statement we have to do is system.out.println table I and J. So the first time we have I0 and we have J0, it means do the output of the element 0 and 0, which is 10. And that's why we have 10 as an output here. Once you increment your J and J is moving to the second column, it means you are doing the output of 0 and 1. 0 and 1, it means the value 20, and this is 20. And then you will increment J and J will be moving. And this is more like do the output of 0 and 2. 0 and 2, the element 30, and this is the output over there. This is by saying we are looking only at row I, 0. Move the columns and do the output of the items inside these columns. Then you have to go to your second row, which is I equal 1. So this will be go to the second row and now I will be moving and the whole process will be starting over again. So I now in this location. So it's more like we are currently in this row and then do the output of this message values in row I. So we have values in row and I is 1. So we'll have to say values in row 1. For J equals 0, do the output of the element at I and J. Remember, I is almost like fixed, so I is having the value 1, but J will be moving, it will be 0, 1, and 2. So when this is the value 0, we'll have the output as 40. When it is 1, we'll have 70. When it is 2, we will have 60. And that's why we'll have these values as an output. Now, if we need to do a small change, instead of having the output for each row, we need to have the output for each column. An obvious solution is always we need two for loops, one for row, one for column. Because here I'm starting with the row, it means we'll start with output for each row and the second one for column. So let's do a swap between the for loop for columns and the for loop for the rows. And this will be our second exercise. So here we are saying, let's do the output of our elements, but this time by columns. So if this is my array and I'm declaring the array and I'm doing the reading of all of the elements, and we need to do the output as follows. Do the output of the first column and do the output of the second column and then do the output of the third column. sorry, here the output should be as follow. Values in column 0. Uh, Let me do this again. This was for each row. So we will have here values for column 0. We should have the value 10 and 40. And then we should have values for column 1, and we should have 20 and 70. And again, we should have the last thing, values for column 2, and the values will be as 30 and 60. So go for each column and just do the output of the values you have over there. Now, as we discussed in the previous slide, always the idea is you should have a loop for rows and you should have a loop for columns. In this order, it means you will start with rows. If I need to do the opposite thing and I will need to start with columns, so I'll just bring the J up and I will have to move the I below. So I will do this. This is for the J and this is for the I. One small thing is when it comes to the J, we mentioned that we say J starting from 0, J should go up to table I dot length. If you do the swap between I and J loops, we cannot write here in this follow, we cannot have a statement like this, table I dot length. Will be a compiling error because I is not defined yet. And that's why the solution we can refer to it as, I'll just have to say J equals 0, J should be less than number of columns, which is a 3. Now when J is 0, it means this is J starting with this column. System.out.println values in column J. So we will come there and we will say values at column J, and the current value of J is 0. And then another loop, I equals 0, I should going up to the length. And here the length is fine, which is the number of rows, which is 2. What we need to do, we need to do the output of the element at I and J. Always remember your syntax should be I and J, which row and which column. So now we have I starting from 0, so this is I. So it means I 0, but J is 0 as well. So the first output we will have is go to 0 and 0, the element inside which is 10, so this is 10. Now go to the loop, the inner loop which is I, increment I, which means the value of I will be moving to the second row, and the statement we have to output I and J. I has been changed, so I is 1, but column is still the same column, which is 0. So I have 1 and 0, which is element 40, so we have the value as 40. Now we are done with the rows. We'll have to go to the beginning of our outer loop, which is J, which means now J should be moving to the second column. So J should be pointing to this column, which is column 1. And we will start I with the fresh values. But first we have to output values in column J. So values in column J, which is column 1. And then for each I from 0, we have to do the output. So I will start from 0 as well. And then the output we need, the element 0, which is I, and the column J, which is 1. So 0 and 1, which is a 20. So this is 20. And then go back and change the value of I. So I will be moving to the second row we have. And then we will do the output of the element as 1 and 1. So 1 and 1, which is 70, and this is as 70. And this will be done with the second column as well. Now, if you just keep going with your loops, so this is the J, and J will be moving to the last value. So now here we will have to say print the values of J, which is, we have here the value of J is currently 2, and then go for each I. So I will be moving 0 and 1, but we know that J will be fixed, so it will be 2. So 0 and 2, which is 30, 0 and 2, which is 30, 1 and 2, which is 60. So we will do the output as follow. So here we have almost the same example in the previous one. So remember, this is a typo, this should be J. So always remember, we need two loops, one for row, one for columns. The idea is if you need to do the output for each row, you will have to start with the row loop, which is for I equals 0, I less than table.length. If you need your output to be for each column, which means you have to go for each element in the column, so that's why you have to start j equals 0, j should be less than the number of columns. And always when you do the output, when you access your elements, always the syntax as the name of your array, location I, location j.